Welcome to the Mrs. Are Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim with NFLDraftFanatics.com, and we will be talking about the Kentucky-Georgia matchup. During the college football season, this podcast highlights draftable players which match up. Our goal is to cover the draftables, players 1 to 400 on our initial big boards, hoping to show which players are improving draft stock before the Senior Bowl kicks off draft season. None of the players discussed on this podcast have officially declared for the NFL draft. So this, I think, is the best draftable matchup this week. Kentucky, Georgia. Don't let the team rankings fool you. There are a couple of games where the two teams are ranked, but I definitely want to have a chance here to start talking about Kentucky and specifically the Kentucky-Georgia matchup and why we should be excited. Okay, so let's start by talking about the Georgia offensive line. So we're talking about Ernest Greene. We're talking about Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss, Jared Wilson. Okay, there's draftable grades on all of those players. They're going to be matched up against Deone Walker from Kentucky. So Deone Walker right now, I have a top 20 grade on. Every offensive lineman that I listed from Georgia is ranked below Walker on my board. Ernest Greene is the highest rated of the Georgia offensive linemen. I have him in the top 60. But we have a great matchup here because I think there's a lot of people that don't know about Deone Walker yet. So even though he's high on the boards, when I say people don't know, I haven't heard his game critiqued the same way that we talk about a Mason Graham or a Kenneth Grant at Michigan. I've heard way more about the Michigan defensive tackles than Deone Walker, but I think we need to start talking about Deone Walker and is he defensive tackle 1 or 2 in this draft class? So Deone Walker is an unusual defensive tackle. He is 6'6", which makes that unusual. But generally speaking, let's take a look at that Deone Walker matchup to the draftable players on the Georgia offensive line. Let's go down one more for Kentucky. Let's talk about Barion Brown, wide receiver. So Barion Brown, I have him in the top 100. Okay, so he's a top 100 prospect for Kentucky at wide receiver. He is going to be matched up against Dalen Everett from Georgia, Julian Humphrey from Georgia, and I have draftable grades on most of those players. I think Julian Humphrey, he's on the fringe of being draftable, but to be able to see a top 70 wide receiver prospect matched up against draftable corners in the same draft class, that's going to be a really good measure for both the corners on Georgia as well as Barion Brown. Does he deserve to be rated that high? Great test for him. Okay, let's go down to the next player on Kentucky. Let's talk about Maxwell Hairston, the cornerback. Okay. He will have the chance to line up against Dominic Lovett, wide receiver from Georgia, Colby Young, wide receiver from Georgia, with Carson Beck, the quarterback from Georgia, throwing to him. And right now, Carson Beck is considered QB1 in this class. So we have a chance to see Hairston. And I've seen variance on where Hairston is rated. The board I'm looking at now, he's top 100. I have seen other analysts have him at top 60. So this will be a really good barometer for where should Hairston be rated. Okay, let's look at the next player down from Kentucky. Linebacker, Jamon Dumas-Johnson. Okay, I have Dumas-Johnson just outside the top 100. So he's somewhere between linebacker 6 and linebacker 10, and this is a loaded linebacker class. If Dumas-Johnson had come out last year, I think he would have been a top 100 linebacker. So I'm expecting Dumas-Johnson to be a top 100 player when all is said and done. But we have a linebacker going up against a quarterback. And you've heard me say this before, but I love linebacker quarterback matchups. So how can Dumas-Johnson make Carson Beck's life difficult, either from blitzing or from spying, or can he diagnose the play and wreak havoc in the passing game? So let's look at that. But Dumas-Johnson is also going up against running backs Trevor Etienne and Branson Robinson. So again, we have a linebacker quarterback matchup. We have a linebacker running back matchup. So those are some things that I would take a look at. Next player down in Kentucky, Dane Key. Okay. And Dane Key is going to be going up against Dalen Everett, as well as Julian Humphrey. So another wide receiver from Kentucky matched up against corners from Georgia. So definitely want to pay attention to that. Okay. We have Marquez Cox, a tackle from Kentucky. Okay. And then if we start looking at the rest of the Georgia players, this is where this is going to get to be interesting, because Cox, from an offensive tackle standpoint, it's a draftable grade right now, early day 3 on the board that I'm looking at. Well, Cox is going to be going up against Mykel Williams, Smael Mondon, Jalen Walker, Nazir Stackhouse. So pretty much no matter who Cox is lined up against, it's probably going to be a draftable player from Georgia. So again, this is a really good measure for the Kentucky offensive tackle prospect, Marquez Cox, against a significantly talented Georgia team. Okay, and let's now round out Georgia, because I don't think we've dove into them yet this year on this podcast. But let's look at the defensive players from Georgia at the top. So Mykel Williams, linebacker edge. Okay, he's in the top 10 on the board I'm looking at. So I've seen a huge variation on Williams. I've seen some people have him outside of round 1 entirely. And then on the board I'm looking at, he's top 10. So he definitely has a lot to prove. Malaki Starks, safety. I have him inside the top 20. In the NFL, he's probably going to play either safety, possibly slot corner. So we can see Starks playing against Kentucky, and whether he's matched up against Barion Brown or Dane Key, that's definitely a matchup I would take a look at. Smael Mondon, okay. I have him inside the top 60, clear early second round grade on Smael Mondon, linebacker from Georgia. So definitely a player to watch for Georgia there. We've talked about Ernest Greene already. Let's go down to Oscar Delp, tight end from Georgia. So couple things. This tight end class is likely going to look like the year that Laporta and Kincaid came out. So there may not be an elite tight end that's going to be taken in the top 5 or the top 10 of the draft. But once you see tight ends come off the board this draft, late round 1, there's probably going to be a run on tight ends late round 1, round 2, round 3. And Oscar Delp is going to be right in the middle of that. So let's take a look at Oscar Delp. Maybe he lines up against Jamon Dumas-Johnson, okay, or possibly J.Q. Hardaway, the corner from Kentucky. So we might see some matchups there, but at minimum, start thinking Delp day 2 and speak it into existence kind of thing. And at this point, I've covered most of the what I would say key matchups or matchups up at the top of the list. This is definitely going to be a good game for draftables. I don't know what the scoreboard is going to look like, but from a improving draft stock or proving you belong, I want to see Deone Walker play. Okay, I want to see Deone Walker, and can he dominate the interior of Georgia's offensive line? That to me is going to tell me a lot about where should Deone Walker get drafted. Because if he's invisible in a game like this, I wouldn't be picking him in the top half of round 1. Unless there's something that I don't know yet from like a testing metrics or something to that effect. So I'm definitely going to be focused on the Kentucky players, and pretty much the top 6 players on Kentucky there are the ones that I'm going to have my eye on. So my name is Jim. I'm with NFLDraftFanatics.com. You can follow me on X or Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. There's no I in Fanatic on my Twitter. NFLDraftFanatics.com is the home of the only interactive mock draft simulator. Interactive means the fans rate the players, the fans control the big board. So anytime you do a mock draft at NFLDraftFanatics.com, the players you pick move up, the players you don't pick move down a little bit. And the more mock drafts you do, the more you're changing the boards. Okay. Remember, every day is draft day if you have the right attitude. So my name's Jim with NFLDraftFanatics.com. This is the Mrs. Are Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. Thank you for liking, following, subscribing. Thank you for listening for the last 12 minutes. I appreciate you. Until next time, thank you.